Greetings, Indie Warriors, and welcome to I Dream of Indie. My name is Ole Gamer Joe, grooving to another review today as we look at musical arcade shooter PopSlinger on the Nintendo Switch.
Nice! It's on!
Now, the first thing you should probably understand about PopSlinger is that it isn't really a rhythm game at all. Instead, your goal is to run around a variety of different levels, shooting enemies of the same color in succession. But before we get into the details surrounding gameplay, let's talk a little bit about PopSlinger's narrative. You begin this game playing as Rhea Carbon, like carbonated soda. There's a theme here. While I was not a fan of the writing and characters presented in this title, I will credit PopSlinger for trying. You have an instructor named Jin accompanying you on this quest, and you're attempting to ward off pesky villains known as the Corazones. The game features a pretty good amount of dialogue both before and after each level. However, I didn't find it particularly well written. None of these characters were all that compelling, and despite the nice portrait arts and aesthetic, which I'll touch on more later, I was reaching for the plus button to skip these scenes, which thankfully you can rather quickly. So then, with a lackluster and uninteresting narrative, my hope was that PopSlinger's frantic arcade gameplay could make up for it, but unfortunately, it just never quite clicked with me. Theoretically, you can play this game as a traditional shooter, but what the game would like you to do is match enemy colors together by shooting those enemies in order. Shooting 4 monsters of the same shade will start a bit of a jam where the music ramps up, and you'll unlock a power-up that you can then use in battle. These power-ups range from a shield to protect you from taking damage, to having Jin appear and fire off bullets for you, like a turret gun backup character of sorts, which was rather useless as often this character would face the wrong direction. It's really all about getting a high score though, as if you can pop 8 enemies of the same color, you'll earn a double progression, but unfortunately, again, I just couldn't get into any rhythm or flow with this game. Enemies will not only show up right in your face, but they'll break your combo if they hit you, and they'll do plenty of hitting you with cheap fireball attacks that feel like they shouldn't have been hitting you at all. I guess there are poor hitboxes here or something. This lack of fun carries over to the bosses at the end of each stage, which are inevitably able to be toppled, but feature frustrating patterns and aren't very fun at all. You can also attempt to pull off some sort of Dreamtime sequence by hitting certain colors in certain orders, but it seemed almost impossible and I couldn't even pull it off. What it ultimately felt like was that I was playing a bad 2D arcade shooter with a gimmick that just doesn't seem to work. PopSlinger will attempt to switch things up by having enemies put up certain colored shields, and you'll need to switch between your soda-themed guns in order to take down those shields, but it honestly just added to the frustration toggling between these different soda guns, and I was ultimately trying to just shoot whatever was in my way to get through these unexciting levels. You can try to dodge out of the way of attacks, but the dodge mechanic is well dodgy, and it's also not that effective due to the animation of it. PopSlinger's poor gameplay really stings because visually, I like the look of this title. It does have a filter that resembles an old tube TV, and even some grainy VHS lines, and hey, I'm old, so I'm a sucker for an 80s, 90s aesthetic. Character art, as I mentioned, is really nice, and while there isn't much in the way of enemy variety, the creatures that are here have a gorgeous hand-drawn style that does look like a 90s cartoon. You have a map that is well detailed as you progress through the different levels, so overall, I really like the visuals of the game. The soundtrack, on the other hand, it just was kind of uninspired, to be honest, considering the fact that this is a game that's partially about music anyways. It's cool how tracks ramp up a bit as you improve your combo, but still, none of these electronic beats really stood out to me. They all kind of meshed into one similar sounding track, and that's a shame in a game where music is supposed to be such a big aspect. The game does feature some voice acting in its cutscenes. Again, I was skipping through those rather quickly, but what I did here was nothing spectacular, nothing terrible. Sounded kind of similar to a typical anime dub, but not great. At the end of the day though, the biggest downside with PopSlinger is that it's just lacking any fun factor. The game never gelled with me and wasn't very fun to play at all. In fact, it was really quite an annoying experience. The color match system doesn't work all that well. Enemies break up the combo with cheap hits, the bosses are really quite obnoxious, and yeah, it just wasn't working with me. You're essentially left with a mediocre 2D arcade experience with some forced battles and those irritating bosses. Conceptually, the developer of this game had some really neat ideas, they just failed to deliver on them.
Motor shot!
Spice bomb! Your odds are low.
Thank you so much for watching the latest video from I Dream of Indie. We would now like to take a moment to pay tribute to our great indie warriors who support us through channel memberships. Bill T, Christian Cruz, Kevilo, Mitchell Hall, Chris Jackson, Nathan Moore, Adriana Amato, CJR, Seacoil, Skepticism, Haley, Julian Colbus, Jen Rose, Jesse, CPM, Bunny, JRS8, Raylin, Marky Mint, Dave Hart, Peekaboo, Lex Noyle, and Eric. Thank you so much for all you do for independent developers, publishers, and for I Dream of Indie. Everybody else, please head down to the description box below. Let's defeat the gaming echo chamber and bring a voice to the voiceless ones in gaming.